Our final speaker is Emily Hulme, a senior lecturer in Department of Philosophy, specializing in ancient Greek and Roman philosophy. Emily has a very, very long view on humanity's endless drive for optimization and whether it will ever help us reach the ultimate end goal. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you. Wow, what a pleasure to be here tonight and to be the last speaker taking us home. The agenda for my remarks will be an optimized life with a touch of Aristotle, and I'll be bringing some of the perspective coming from my discipline, philosophy, to some of the wonderful questions that have opened up tonight. So here's my opening bid. Everything meaningful and magical in human life comes about from sustained effort. Optimization culture, if we can call it that, is in a sense about efficiently pursuing what matters to us in life. And that's not a bad thing. That being said, that process is pointless if we haven't actually thought about what it is that we want to pursue. To use an example from Greek mythology, Sisyphus rolling his rock up the hill ever more quickly and efficiently and with perfect posture is not a good model for what we want out of life. So that gives us the question of what do we want? Well, asking questions about what we want out of life is actually really scary, and most people avoid it. If students in my classes in Greek philosophy at the University of Sydney get nothing else out of these classes, what I would hope they get is this, that society then and now will tell them over and over again that the things that will make them happy are basically money and respect from other people. And they should ask themselves, is that true? Do these things make you happy? The liberating but scary message that Socrates offered, the founder of Greek philosophy in many ways, was they don't. And it's worth contending with that. Aristotle, a student 2 generations after Socrates, gave us some very helpful reflections on how to think about these difficult questions. Here's in a nutshell what he tells us. He says all humans want to be happy in the sort of broad sense of life satisfaction, so not in the sense of happiness of like, woohoo, I'm enjoying a day at Luna Park, not that sense, but this sense where when you ask parents, what do you want for their children? And they say, I want them to be happy, that sense of happy. He thinks that's what all of us want. And he thinks this is what we really want, although we pursue it in a lot of different ways throughout our different lives, depending on our preferences, values, and the like. He thinks it's something, though, that structures our motivation quite generally. Here's a way to understand this. Here's a way I like to understand this. This slide will be revelatory of what generation I am. It's based off the plot of Dawson's Creek. So what I'd like to draw your attention to is a few characteristics of what's going on here. So we'll start at the bottom of the slide. We have a few different characters from that TV show, and they're pursuing different things in life. They have different tastes and preferences and attitudes and values and all of that. So we've got Joey, Jen, and Dawson. But you'll see the slide has all of them going up at the top towards happiness. In Greek, we usually use the word eudaimonia for this, and it's happiness in that sense I talked about a few minutes ago. And so each of them is pursuing this in different ways. Let me talk a little bit about how Joey is doing it. So Joey is a very studious young woman, so she takes studying very seriously. She wants to achieve highly in her classes. And if you ask Joey, why is it so important to you that you get a high mark on this essay? Well, it's not an end unto itself, so to speak. Rather, she would say something like, because I want to go to college. And why do I want to go to college? You could ask the same question. She'd say something like, I want to get a white-collar job. And she grew up in poorer circumstances, so if you asked her, why do you want this white-collar career? She might tell you something like, money, I want to have material resources to feel secure, something like that. So you can hear this kind of repeated pattern. I've expressed it a couple different ways, but it's sort of the same question throughout of, what are you doing this for? Well, it's for the sake of something else, is one way we talk about that in philosophy. And sometimes we use slightly more technical, but I think in a very helpful way, terms, the ones I have at the top of the slide there, instrumental versus final goods, where we talk about something have instrumental value, where you're doing it for the sake of something else, versus final value, where you are doing something for its own sake. Now, I've pointed out you can see this pattern And it's not just true of careers. You can see it in terms of relationships, where you can ask someone, what do you think that you'll get out of this relationship, whether that's a friendship or a relationship of business or a romantic relationship, all sorts of things. It can be true for hobbies. It can be true for all kinds of things in human life. The other Aristotelian point getting made is that he thinks that we can ask that series of questions about all these kinds of different things we do, and they all top out in happiness. So you can ask, why do you care about this relationship? Why do you care about this job, etc.? And eventually it'll lead to this question of, well, I think it's going to make me happy. I think being in this relationship is going to make me happy. I think having this job or having money is going to make me happy. And he thinks you can't ask that question one more time, because it doesn't really make sense to ask, why do you want to be happy? For the sake of what do you want to be happy? He thinks it's clear that we're all on the same page, that our question just stops there. Happiness is the final answer. One more little piece of philosophical terminology I'll use for that. Aristotle calls this then, or rather us doing philosophy in English after him, ultimate final end. Final end because it's something you do everything else for the sake of, and ultimate because the buck stops there. It's the last one. It's like the final boss sort of thing. So that's a sort of schema for understanding human motivation, thinking through these questions of what it is that we want. Here's a puzzle you might find yourself with here. This doesn't seem that helpful, because how do we know what happiness is? That's a tricky question. It's a really timely one and also an eternal one. Aristotle says some people think happiness is pleasure. Still a common answer today. Other people think it's fame. Others think that it has something to do with being a good person. Here's one thing, though, that he excludes as an answer, and I think it's a really interesting one. He says it can't be money. And the reason he excludes this has actually already been given. The reason he excludes this is because even the formal description of what happiness is, as the final answer to the question of what are you doing everything else for the sake of, is a question that money can't be the answer to. Why? Because you can always ask about money. What is it for the sake of? It's that I want to buy a yacht. It's that I want to feel secure with my material resources. It could be any number of things, but it's not that final buck stops here kind of answer. I think that's really interesting, not least because, of course, it is tempting sort of perennially to substitute in money as an answer for that sort of question. The thought that I want to leave you with tonight is the core insight that I alluded to before. Thinking about the question of what we really want is scary, but it's a question that's worth confronting. I think that some degree of the attraction of optimization culture is that it actually lets us hide from that question, dodge that question. If we just take for granted that someone else can give the answer to that question, our boss, our parents, society at large, some tech overlord, if we have them just answer that question and we just do the business of finding the means to it, then we don't have to actually worry about that question anymore. But to do that is to miss out on one of the most important questions that gives meaning and shape to our lives. And no life will be genuinely optimal without giving an answer to it. Thanks.